$75,000 gone before a single wall goes up. And that's what happens when your offer to lease doesn't account for the gap between what the landlord offers and what construction actually costs. It happens. Today we're breaking down how tenant improvement allowances really work in Burlington office leasing, 3 ways tenants end up paying for those build-outs, and the one clause that keeps a surprise invoice from detonating your budget halfway through construction. I'm Susan, that commercial realtor. I work with office tenants, owners, and investors across Burlington and the GTA. Tenant Improvement Allowances, TIA. Everyone loves this discussion, but nobody loves the overage discussion. Tenants hear the number, celebrate, and assume someone else is handling the build-out. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not. Let's break it down. First, a quick translation into normal human language. A tenant improvement allowance, or TIA, is money the landlord contributes toward building out your office space. Sometimes it pays for all of it. Typically, landlords quote a TIA as a dollar amount per square foot. In Burlington office leasing right now, you'll commonly see landlords offering anywhere from turnkey space to modest refresh allowances to full construction packages, which will also vary depending on lease term, covenant strength, building class, vacancy, and how badly the landlord wants the deal. That last one, they won't advertise, but it matters. Here's where tenants get into trouble immediately. They hear $35 per square foot allowance and mentally translate that as, the landlord is paying for my build-out. No. The landlord is contributing toward your build-out. Those are 2 very different conversations, and the gap between them is what this video is about. There are 3 ways this gets resolved, and let's go through each one. Path number 1, you stay within that allowance. This is the cleanest version of the deal. 5,000 square feet landlord TIA at $35 a square foot. Your tenant allowance is $175,000. Architect designs the space and contractor prices it. The number comes back at or under $175,000. Done. No gap, no extra money out of pocket. The landlord funds the build out and you move in. Except one thing tenants miss. If you underspend, you don't get that difference back. Say the landlord build-out comes in at $140,000. That's $35,000 sitting on the table. The landlord's not cutting you a check for the unused portion. Most TIA structures are use it or lose it. The balance stays with the landlord. 2 things that means in practice. Don't underspend strategically thinking you'll pocket the savings, because you won't. And if there's something the space truly needs, spend the allowance on it now. That money doesn't roll forward into a renewal or convert into rent relief unless your lease specifically says it does. Path 1 works when your build-out can be scoped to fit the allowance. You can design to the budget rather than the budget to the space, and standard finishes are acceptable for your business. It's the financially cleanest structure. No financing costs, no added rent, no overhang. The catch is the landlord allowances in Burlington right now don't always stretch as far as tenants expect, which brings us to path number 2. Path number 2, the landlord amortizes that gap. Same scenario, same 5,000 square feet, same landlord offer of $35 TIA. The actual build-out pricing comes closer to $50 per square foot, which is $250,000, and the gap is $75,000. The landlord offers to front that extra and amortize it into your lease payments. Amortization means the landlord lends you the money and you pay it back through higher rent over the lease term, typically with interest applied. So instead of writing a check for $75,000 at lease commencement, that cost folds into your monthly occupancy costs. On a 5-year lease, for example, you might see an effective net rent increase by $1.50 to $2.50 per square foot per year. Is amortization bad? No. For businesses deploying capital into equipment or staffing simultaneously preserving cash flow, that can matter more than minimizing long-term rent cost. Paying back $75,000 over 5 years through the lease sometimes makes more economic sense than writing that check up front. But you have to understand what you're agreeing to. Before accepting amortization, nail down what interest rate applies to the amortized balance. Over what term is it repaid, and does it survive into renewals? What happens if you exit early? Is the unamortized balance due immediately? Usually. And is the amortization documented separately from the base rent so that you can see exactly what you're paying back at any point? Rarely. That last one matters more than people think. Some tenants go into a renewal period still paying off that construction from 5 years ago because nobody structured the payoff clearly the first time. By then, everyone who remembers the original deal has moved on except the lease, which has not. Which leads us to path number 3, where you pay that overage directly. This is the third option and the simplest math. Landlord contributes $175,000, the total build-out is $250,000, and you pay $75,000 difference. No amortization, no interest, no financing cost baked into the rent. This makes sense when you're a financially strong tenant with liquidity. You want to keep long-term occupancy costs as low as possible, or your build-out is highly customized. That last point is worth pausing. The more specific your improvements, the less amicable a landlord is to funding it. Landlords know some of these build-outs are not useful to the next tenant, and they become noticeably less generous with allowances when the build-out only serves your business and won't survive your tenancy. In those cases, accepting that you're funding the specialty work yourself is often the cleaner negotiation position anyway, and frankly, a faster conversation. Direct payment also gives you cleaner exit math. If you leave early or restructure, you're not untangling an amortized construction balance from your rent obligations. Knowing all of this, how do tenants get blindsided? Well, the problem is across all 3 paths. Most tenants negotiate the allowance before construction pricing exists. That landlord $35 TIA package doesn't guarantee a full build-out. The landlord is not being dirty or underhanded, but everyone assumes the build-out will fit. The offer to lease gets signed, the drawings get done, then the tender pricing comes back and it's $50 a square foot. Unfortunately, now you have a signed lease, committed to the space, a build-out is in motion, and that $75,000 gap nobody planned for. This happens in Burlington office deals, not because anyone is dishonest, because construction pricing is volatile, allowances get negotiated on assumptions, and detailed cost estimates come later in the process. The lease almost always says the tenant is responsible for all costs above that allowance. So if the gap wasn't addressed in the offer to lease, the bill lands on the tenant every time without exception. The lease is not interested in your assumptions, so what can you do? Surprise! There's a clause that prevents this, and it all starts in the offer to lease. Before drawings, before pricing, before anyone picks a finish, and here's what the language needs to accomplish. 1. A pricing review right. You want the explicit right to review final construction pricing before construction is authorized to proceed. If pricing comes in above that allowance, you have options. If the lease is signed and the construction is underway, you have a bill. And those are very different places to be standing. 2. Scope revision rights. If construction pricing exceeds your budget, you want contractual right to revise the scope, reduce finishes, eliminate features, redesign the layout before you're financially committed to that overage. This clause converts a surprise invoice into a design conversation, and that's a significant upgrade. 3. If amortization is part of the deal, document it properly. Interest rate, repayment term, what happens at renewal, what happens to the unamortized balance at any point, whether early departure triggers immediate repayment. It does. Every one of those details needs to be explicit, not implied, not we'll figure it out. 4. Defined approval timelines. Who approves the drawings and how long do they have to decide? Approval rights are standard. Undefined timelines are the problem. Drawings sit unanswered, construction stalls, occupancy slips, and meanwhile the rent clock may already be running. The offer to lease needs to define approval timelines and day-for-day delay clause. If the landlord delays approvals beyond the agreed timeline, the tenant's dates move accordingly. Rent commencement, occupancy, construction deadlines, all of it shifts day for day. Now don't get all cocky. This will have to work both ways. Tenants can't create delays either. Both parties should be working toward the same outcome, completed space delivered on time. Define the timeline and define the consequences. Make sure neither side benefits from slowing this process down. The offer to lease is a short document, but it sets the framework for every one of these conversations. What doesn't get addressed there gets inherited as risk later. And risk in commercial real estate has a very unique way of becoming expensive very quietly. What do smart tenants do before they sign? The tenants who navigate this well do one thing differently. They get a realistic construction estimate before they finalize the lease terms. Not a perfect number, not a full tender. Just enough to know, is the landlord's allowance roughly aligned with realistic build costs? If there's a gap, approximately how big is it and how will it be handled? Which of these three paths makes sense for this business right now? That information changes what you negotiate for. Maybe you push for a higher allowance, maybe you accept the gap and structure the amortization properly. Maybe you redesign the scope to stay within the budget. But you make that decision with facts, not assumptions, and you get the agreement in writing before construction pricing surprises anyone. If you're looking at office space in Burlington, the question isn't, what's the TIA? The question is, will it cover the build-out we need? What happens if it doesn't? Who controls pricing approvals and on what timeline? If there's a gap, can it be amortized and what are the terms? Does the offer to lease give us the final review before we're committed to that overage? 3 paths to that gap and 1 clause decides who carries it. If this helped you think about your office lease differently, like, subscribe, follow, and send it to someone assuming TIA covers everything. They'll either thank you or owe you lunch. Either way, win-win. I'm Susan, that commercial realtor, built for business, backed by data, negotiating with bite. The build-out number matters, but the language around that build-out, that matters more. That's where good representation earns its keep. So now that you know, what are you going to do about it?